everyone, and welcome to the Lord Gord Podcast. This is your host, Lord Gord. I'm giving you information that's factually correct and politically incorrect. Madeo, humba-G-I-O. Don't look any further. So this week, I'm going to be talking about something that's near and dear to me, something that is grim, and if it isn't stopped, it will lead my state down the rabbit hole of destruction and economic catastrophe. This week, I'm talking about Hispanic Detroit. That's right, Hispanic Detroit. So let's dive into it. California has been following what has been called the Detroit pattern: increasing taxes, pandering to unions, creating an anti-business climate, implementing soft crime laws, and expanding entitlement programs. Like the blacks that were led to the slaughter by leftist politicians in Detroit and virtually every other large Democrat-run city in the country, leftist Californian politicians and government employees are doing the same to Hispanics by excusing their criminality and social pathology, importing millions of low social capital, legal and illegal immigrants from Latin America, stoking feelings of resentment, lulling them into government dependency, and forcing them into failing government schools. The ever-expanding Hispanic voting bloc will help the leftist California politicians further destroy the economic viability of the state, turning it into a Hispanic Detroit. Let's dive into the evidence. I want some evidence. Here's a little overview of Detroit. Detroit was once the crown jewel of the United States. It had the lowest level of black unemployment in the country at 3.4%. Produced wonderful music from Motown Records, like It Was Just My Imagination, or Ooh, Baby. Had the highest percentage of black home ownership in the country and was deemed the Paris of the Midwest. Coleman Young, the first black mayor of Detroit, helped destroy Detroit with leftist policies. He cut funding for law enforcement, raised taxes, enriched insiders and other favored groups, stoked feelings of resentment and hostility among his primarily black voting base, and was anti-business. The results were that in 1990, Detroit's population had fell from 1.51 million in 1970 to 1.03 million in 1990. Unemployment had risen from 10.3% in 1969 to 20.6% in 1990. It doubled. The percentage of households living in poverty during that time span rose from 18.6% in 1969 to 29.8% in 1990. Detroit also became a majority-minority city by 1990 as the black population grew to 75.7% from 43.7% in 1970. In 2011, Detroit's population fell to 706,585, and 34.7% of its citizens were on welfare. The 257,576 people in Detroit who do not have a job and are not looking for one outnumber the 224,846 residents that do have jobs, and out of the 224,846 residents that have jobs, 15.3% have jobs with the government. That means that a very small percentage of the Detroit working population, or able-bodied working population, is actually producing any wealth. Thus, this city that boasted 1,849,568 residents in 1950 has only 190,346 private sector workers today. you know anything about wealth creation, the private sector is the best method to employ people and to produce wealth and to raise the living standards of everyone. If you have only a small number of people in your city actually producing wealth in goods and services that are effective and cost efficient, that is not the recipe of a functional, thriving city, as Detroit is a third world hellhole. Detroit today has the highest property taxes in the nation, is the most dangerous city in the country, and has almost $9 billion of public union debt. And taking Detroit to what I'm deeming as Hispanic Detroit, now we're going to link Detroit to California here. The Los Angeles and Long Beach area ranks worse than Detroit in economic freedom. Let me repeat that. The Los Angeles, Long Beach metropolitan area ranks worse than Detroit in economic freedom. Detroit ranks 345th out of 384 of the major areas in the country, and the Los Angeles Long Beach area ranks 361st out of 384. So have you seen how bad Detroit has gotten because of its leftist policies and its anti-business policies? And you see that the LA Long Beach area is worse. What do you expect is going to happen if we continue at this if we continue following this current path that was paved by leftism? California has 13 cities in the bottom 10th percentile of economic freedom in the United States. Chico, Redding, Los Angeles, Long Beach, Yuba City, Madera, Chowchilla, Stockton, Hanford, Corcoran, Fresno, Modesto, Bakersfield, Merced, Visalia, Porterville, and El Centro. Let me touch on Stockton for a little bit. In my podcast about black crime, if you check some of my previous podcasts, if you're a new listener, check out my podcast on black crime. It's very informative. Stockton, California is one of the most dangerous cities in the country. Has a completely inept government, has welfare dependency out the wazoo. I mean, it is a sterling example of leftist policies and what happens when you follow leftist policies. My mom and my sister were watching Real Time with Bill Maher, and I was watching it with them. And the new mayor of Stockton, California, is this young black leftist Democrat, said nothing about the failing schools, the absurd crime rate, the outrageous levels of government dependency, the debt. He said nothing about that, nor was he asked. He was up there to talk about universal basic income, which is another redistribution scheme. And as I have explained, and as many others have explained, redistributionist schemes never work. They don't create wealth. They take wealth, they squander it, and it inhibits the people who are living off the wealth of others to develop their human capital to create more wealth. And looking at a recent report, universal basic income failed miserably in Finland. So you have more leftist policy that this guy is going to implement, even though leftist policy has led to a city being a third world hellhole. All right, now let's touch on California's dilemma and its parallels to Detroit. California has the highest poverty rate in the country at 20%. It has 33% of the nation's welfare recipients while having 12% of the nation's population. It ranks 42nd in the nation in education and in the bottom quadrant in infrastructure. We have the highest income tax rate in the country, the highest state sales tax. We rank dead last in friendliness to businesses, and our underfunded pension liability is double that of any other state. Detroit. The state has over $1.5 trillion in state debt, and about $713 billion of that debt is due to government pensions. From 1985 to 2009, state GDP in California grew by 5.5% per year on average, not adjusted for inflation. Some pretty good growth. Annual growth in state spending was 6.8% on average. So essentially, they're spending a lot more money than they're taking in. So it doesn't matter how much money you're taking in if you're spending more money than you're taking in. You know, Michael Jackson was making a bunch of money, but he was spending so much money that he was millions and millions and millions of dollars in debt. And that's leftist policy virtually anywhere you see all around the world. They have an uncanny ability to run up debts. The LA, Long Beach, Anaheim area now has the highest poverty rate in the country at 20.5%. I wonder why. I wonder who are the people who are predominantly poor in LA, Long Beach, and Anaheim. We spend $1.3 billion annually on welfare. So I guess if this is more evidence to show that these redistributionist policies don't work, because if they did, we wouldn't have the highest poverty rate in the country. It seems that when you subsidize poverty, you get more poverty. That only makes sense. 59% of welfare recipients in LA County are Hispanic, and 49% of the state's welfare recipients are Hispanic. 55% of immigrant families receive some kind of welfare, and the state has spent $958 billion on welfare from 1995 to 2015. Obviously, your welfare policies don't work when you confiscate insubordinate amount of wealth through force and give it to people who it doesn't belong, and your poverty rate is still abysmal. Any rational thinking person who wasn't trying to bribe people to vote for you would think, hey, this redistribution stuff doesn't really solve the poverty problem. California and LA County are notorious for not verifying the immigration status of its welfare recipients. People receiving benefits fraudulently aren't reported unless there's outside proof of illegal residence. Translation, don't ask, don't tell. Because we know that California doesn't follow the law. We know that they allocate billions of dollars in resources, in confiscated resources to illegals and other people who aren't legally allowed to be here. They give driver's license to illegals. How could you give verification to someone with no documents saying who they are? Well, that you'd follow that if you were a logical thinker who wasn't hell-bent on creating more dependence of government so you can continue to get votes and expand your power. Also, unless the federal immigration authorities come in and say, hey, we're coming for this guy, they're not going to check for your immigration status before they give you welfare. And the reason being is if you're a welfare office, you have every incentive to sign up as much people on welfare as possible. You want to keep your job, and you want to grow the entitlement class so you can keep the cash flow coming. It sounds very cynical, but it's true. I mean, you have Jerry Brown, who says that we are a sanctuary state. Translation, we aren't going to enforce federal law. We are going to allow illegals and other criminals to stay in our state and to suck on the government teat. All at the expense of the legal, law-abiding taxpayers. You have people like Libby Schaff in Oakland, another third war hellhole. I believe it's the third most dangerous city in the United States of America. Being a lookout for illegals, telling illegals that the federal authorities are coming so to go hide. She put the priorities of the illegals, and most importantly, her voting bloc for the next 200 years, she put that over her law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. That's California. A federal immigration reform study found that providing education, health care, law enforcement, and government services to illegals and their dependents cost California taxpayers $25.2 billion annually, and illegals only bring in $3.5 billion annually. It's a losing proposition for California taxpayers. It's a losing proposition for the law of the land. 3 million illegals are said to live in the state with 1.1 million U.S.-born children. The funding of K-12 education costs taxpayers $14.4 billion. Justice and law enforcement cost $4.4 billion. Medical services cost the taxpayers $4.4 billion, including $388 million to 68,000 births to illegal alien mothers, and public assistance costs are at $792 million for the taxpayers. Dan Stein, the president of FAIR, says that, quote, despite overwhelming evidence that illegal immigration represents an unsustainable fiscal burden to the state, the California legislature and local governments across the state continue to provide new benefits, new services, and new privileges to illegal aliens, even as the state neglects the needs and concerns of other Californians. Translations: the California government is much more committed to growing their new voting bloc, which are the illegal and legal Hispanics, than they are to the law-abiding taxpayers. Who would have thought? The cost will continue to grow so long as the state continues to reward illegal immigration and impedes immigration enforcement. California taxpayers will continue to be the losers in this unhappy scenario. Close quote. Hispanic Detroit, man. You're bringing in legions of unproductive migrants, both legal and illegal, that are costing California taxpayers billions of dollars. And what are they getting back in return? More crime, less businesses, worse schools, terrible roads. Literally, the California taxpayers, all they're getting for the exorbitant taxes that they pay are going to be more exorbitant taxes by lieu of the Hispanic voters that are going to vote in their best interests. And their best interests are getting more free stuff and not being sent back to the countries that they came from illegally. Who would have thought that? So let's talk about the culture, the underclass Hispanic culture. I touched on this in my podcast on the underclass. Go check that out. So I'm just going to give you guys a little taste of this. So I'm talking about today in America. The illegitimacy rate for Hispanics in the United States is 53%. And if you listen to my podcast on the rise in illegitimacy and its consequences, illegitimacy is the biggest creator of poverty today. If you're born out of wedlock without a father, you're 5 times more likely to be poor, 3 times more likely to fail in school, and 20 times more likely to go to prison. A vast majority of teen dropouts, teen drug users, gang members, and juvenile delinquents come from single mother homes. Over 70%, I believe, with all of those. So that's very grim that number is at 53%, and it's only rising. It's not getting lower. And what's more chilling is in places like Mexico and the Savior, their illegitimacy rates are in the 70s in terms of percents. Let's keep going. The incarceration rate for second-generation Hispanics is 8 times the rate for the first generation, which means that second-generation Hispanics are assimilating downward into the underclass. They're adopting these antisocial, counterproductive behaviors against law enforcement, against education, and against traditional civilized values, not having a baby out of wedlock, not getting a bunch of tattoos, valuing education, saving your money, so on and so forth. By 2050, Hispanics would be a quarter of the U.S. population and by far the majority population in California. And the implications are, I believe that about 60% of Hispanics in California vote Democrat. They vote for the leftist Democrats. All these policies that they're doing, advocating for illegal immigration by not deporting them, by giving them government services, and by allowing them to be educated and allowing them to work in this country, even though they're illegal. You're offering no deterrence for those illegals to go home, and you're offering no deterrence for illegals that want to come to your city, which is their plan, of course, because if those illegals have kids, which most of them do, those kids, by and large, are going to vote Democrat. Do you really think that those kids are going to vote for the party that actually wants to uphold the law and wants to kick out people who are unlawfully here? Or do you think that they're going to vote for the party that allows their criminal conduct to continue? It's not that hard to understand. It's an anti-assimilation culture steeped in victimhood and bad behavior. Oh my goodness. If you listen to La Raza or any of those other clowns, their whole platform is give illegals free stuff, give legals free stuff, get a bunch of people out of jail, and stop sending people to jail. Sounds like Detroit. Nowhere in that platform does it say, hey, we're going to help Hispanics learn the language of this country, which is English. We're going to help them learn the benefits of free markets, individual responsibility, and contraception. We're going to enforce and value education and school choice. We're going to break up the government monopoly, these failing schools that do nothing but crank out Democrat voters. No, that's not their platform at all, because they're in cahoots with the big government leftists in Sacramento. They're in cahoots with the unions. So they have every incentive to produce, to keep the status quo going, because the status quo is what keeps the cash flow coming and what keeps their power growing, and what keeps their constituents poor and ignorant, which is what they want. And yes, whenever you go to their neighborhoods, rarely will you ever see an American flag being hung anywhere. It'll be Mexico flags. But the great reality is with a lot of these illegals is that they don't want to go back to Mexico or the Savior or Guatemala or whatever hellhole they come from. They don't want to go back, because if they wanted to go back, why wouldn't they like ICE? If someone was forcing me to make a bunch of money or whatnot, I would be like, okay, find me. But they don't want to be found. But if they're flying that flag, that must mean that their country's so great. And we know it's not. And, they're taught to hate the country. They're taught that in school. They're taught that in the media, TV world, Telemundo, whatever the hell they watch. They are taught that this is a racist country, it's a bigoted country, and you're owed something for nothing. Let's continue this. It's a culture that doesn't value education or scholarly pursuits. Oh my goodness, yes. The reality is that the more Hispanic a school district becomes, the worse results that you get on average for Hispanic students. It is not an academic culture. If you look at the test scores, if you look at the study habits, the reading habits, if you look at the levels of college admission, it is plain to see that they are not the Chinese, they're not the Indians from India, they're not the Japanese. They are not cultures that are geared towards academic excellence. They're just not, on average. I'm not saying all, but on average, it is not an academic culture whatsoever. This is another fact for you. 30% of the nation's English language learner students are third generation. Obviously, you're not assimilating well if 30% of the English language learners in the country are third generation. Yeah, I said this already. They're taught to hate whites through mediums like Telemundo and La Raza. There's a guy named Conservative Mexican on YouTube, and he speaks about this. He lives in Santa Ana, and he talks about how much crime is in Santa Ana because of illegal immigration, how bad the schools are because of illegal immigration, and the general culture of victimology and lawlessness that is prevalent in Santa Ana. You know, he sees that most Hispanics are sympathetic to the illegals, you know, over the laws and the principles of this country, because they're extremely tribal. He talks about how people like George Ramos on Telemundo, they preach the politics of envy and resentment and hostility, which is what you'll find on black stations like BET or TV One or CNN. It's the same victim mindset that keeps people down and convinces them that there's nothing that they can change about themselves to improve their position, which we know isn't true. So let's talk about some of the consequences of the leftist policies in California, which mirror Detroit, and the fact that they're creating a huge voting bloc in Hispanics. So let's talk about business. The minimum wage will rise to $15 an hour in California by 2020. It will lead to a loss of about 700,000 jobs. An economist at Moody's calculated that 31,000 to 160,000 manufacturing jobs in California will be lost. Also, Businesses small and large have been leaving California. Nestle has left. Northrop Grumman has left. Carl's Jr. has moved to Nashville, Tennessee. Also, 61,000 more people have left California than have moved there in 2016 due to high taxes. I have a podcast on prices and economic freedom, and it's really simple to understand why raising the minimum wage is going to lead to that many jobs being lost in the state. The reality is that pay and productivity are not independent to one another. I was talking to someone about this yesterday where I said, you can go get a $1 hamburger from McDonald's, and most people in that market for hamburgers will buy that $1 hamburger. But if you raise the $1 hamburger to a $5 price, that doesn't make that $1 hamburger any more delicious or any more filling for your stomach. So obviously when you raise the price of a good, you're going to get less consumption. And when you lower the price of a good, you're going to get more consumption. So with this minimum wage law, you're going to price a lot of low-skilled people out the market who don't produce $15 an hour worth of labor. You're going to kill a lot of small businesses by increasing the cost of labor. And last time I checked, labor accounts for about 80% of business costs. You're going to make it harder for people to create wealth and start these small independent businesses because you have to pay people more money than they're worth. And that's and also because of the extreme regulations and red tape and taxes, you are just adding more expenses to wealth creation, which is going to lead to less wealth creation and less jobs. Also, because of this anti-business climate with high taxes, with burdensome regulations, and inflated labor costs, no one who wants to start a business is going to invest in California. None of these business people are looking at California saying, that's a place I'd really want to invest in. That's a place that's going to benefit my company, it's going to benefit my employees, and it's going to benefit my country. No one's looking at that. The same thing with Detroit. No one is looking at Detroit saying, because of Detroit's exorbitant taxes and regulations, that's a place that I create wealth in. That's a place that's a good investment. No one's saying that, man. And the reality is, I believe that some leftist politicians in California, they want it this way. Because the less people that are working, the more that they're going to be dependent on government. The more that they're dependent on government, the more likely they're going to vote for the party of entitlements and big government. The Democrats, which created this anti-business climate in the first place. So by creating unemployment and creating a lack of job creation, you're going to have more dependence on government, and they're just going to grow their government power, which is going to lead to less wealth, less job creation, and less investments, which is going to lead to more poverty and more dysfunction. That is the policy of the Democrats, and that's a policy that you see all across the country: Detroit, Chicago, Baltimore, Oakland, St. Louis, Philadelphia. It's the same thing. They don't care about poor people. They care about poverty because they're able to use poverty to grow their power and dictate what others are to do. They're able to enrich themselves and other insiders by creating poverty. But so many people aren't able to see that. And I'm trying to warn people otherwise. These are disastrous economic policies. If you want to rise people out of poverty, you have to create wealth. They have to acquire skills. They have to behave responsibly. You can't create wealth in an anti-business climate. No one's creating any wealth. Let's talk about more policies that are leading to California becoming Hispanic Detroit. Big government. The teachers union and the social service workers are big on illegal immigration because it's a huge voting bloc. Their children will likely vote Democrat for life if they're allowed to stay in the country. School districts all across California welcome illegals and hook them on the heroin of government dependency. They have all kinds of programs: breakfast in the classroom, free lunch, free after school care, free hot lunch after school. They are hooking these kids on the idea that it is someone else's responsibility to feed you. It's someone else's responsibility to educate you. It is at someone else's expense that you are to live. It's a horrible mindset that leads to chaos, dysfunction, and death. Okay? The reason that they want the votes is because the union wants a monopoly on the students. All the teachers' unions, whether they're in California or nationwide, are arms of the Democrat Party. All of it is because the Democrat Party is keeps the status quo in line. They're enemies of charter schools. They're enemies of school choice. It allows those failing government schools to keep a monopoly on the students and to keep the cash flow coming. It doesn't matter that these schools spend well above the national average in expenditures per pupil, and they achieve dismal results. And they've been achieving dismal results for decades, even as the cost of education have risen sharply since the 70s. The test scores and the reading scores have remained stagnant. But they will come out and sell you a little bit more of their money that they don't deserve. The children would be much better off. But it's all a lie. I said they are a huge voting bloc for the Democrat Party. They make large donations, huge donations. In return, they get fat pensions at the expense of the taxpayer. And they trap students in failing government schools. Let me give you an example of this. 67% of LAUSD students are below standard in English, and 75% are below standard in math. The numbers for the state are 56% respectively. So 56% of all California students are below standard in math and English. LAUSD is predominantly Hispanics and allocates tax dollars to illegals. And I explain why they allocate tax dollars to illegals. They do that so they hook them on the heroin of government dependency. They convince those illegals that the Democrats are their friends. They will get you free stuff that you don't want to pay for, that you're not entitled to. And in return, you will continue to vote for them, which will erode the economic viability of the city, will increase crime, will drive businesses out, and will make it Detroit. LAUSD spends over $7 billion a year and achieves horrible results. Even as enrollment has gone down since 2004, costs have gone up, as well as the number of administrators. In the past 5 years, administration has grown 22%, and the number of teachers has fallen 9%. The true amount spent per pupil in LAUSD is $25,208. That's factoring in all the pensions that these people don't deserve. That's how much they're spending. So let's give a segue back to Detroit. Detroit. In Detroit, a $2 million grant to open the first charter school in 1999 was stopped by who? Who stopped this $200 million grant to open the first independent school in Detroit? None other than the teachers' union. And the teachers' union is the arm of what party? The Democrat Party. And there's another example of that, even in New York. I forget the name of the charter school, but there's a charter school with a huge waiting list. It gets the same ghetto black students in Harlem that the failing government schools get. And those kids test well above the national average. And the union and the Democrats want that school to get shut down. If they really cared about the education of the kids, why would they want to get a school shut down that's achieving extremely positive results? Because if people understand the shell game, that funding and money isn't the key to success in a viable education system, if they understand that this government monopoly has been failing the kids and that there are better alternatives elsewhere, they're going to lose their monopoly. They're going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their power. It'll be all over for them. And no monopoly wants to lose its power. None. No monopoly wants competition. That's the beauty of a true free market. There are no monopolies. Competitors compete with each other for resources, and they try to make the best product in the most efficient way so that they can earn the business of customers. And those that are able to do that in an effective manner are able to grow their business, and those who aren't are eliminated. But that's not how government agencies run. They enforce monopolies because they understand if there's any competition, they get eliminated because they stink. talking about California, 54.24% of all California students are Hispanic. It's no coincidence that a majority of the students are Hispanic, and the test results and the education is so grim. I told you, it's not an academic culture. They come with very low social capital. They don't study like the Chinese. They don't value education like the Chinese. It's not that hard to understand. I know I've worked with these students before, and I'm just talking on the average. Of course, you have great students out there, but on the average, it's not an academic culture, okay? Let's talk about the social service bureaucracy. They have a vested interest in illegals and other dysfunctional Hispanics because they are disproportionately represented on the welfare rolls. With an illegitimacy rate of over 50%, they are easy pickings for the trap of government dependency. About 60% of all food stamp recipients are single mothers. 90% of all TANF recipients are single mothers. Last numbers I checked, 90% of the people on welfare are single mothers. And single motherhood and illegitimacy are the largest causes of poverty today. So, if you want a voting bloc, if you want to keep people poor, there's nothing that you should incentivize more than single motherhood, which is what Democrats have been doing for 50 years with welfare and non-judgmentalism in the sexual revolution. You think about that, and it all makes sense. You know, one thing that made me leave the left in the Democrat Party was once I understood how poverty was and crime were linked to single motherhood, the left has no solution for it. Their solution, quote unquote, is to subsidize the same behavior that creates the poverty and the dysfunction. You never see them advocate for marriage and family. And I understand now, because last time I checked, over 70% of single mothers voted for Obama. A vast majority of single mothers vote for Democrats. If you want more Democrat votes, you're going to create more single mothers. How are you going to create more single mothers? By expanding the welfare rolls, by incentivizing single motherhood, by deterring marriage, by rewarding illegitimacy and other poverty-creating behaviors, by artificially increasing the cost of labor, which will create a loss of jobs and a loss of business and more unemployment and more government dependency. That's what you do. Okay? So as government dependency leads to single mothers, crime and poverty will follow, like I said, leading to the need of more social workers and tax dollars to combat the problem that they perpetuate. Oh my goodness, yes, the social worker bureaucracy is huge in these Hispanic schools all across the state. And even in LA, man, you get tons of these dysfunctional kids from these single mother households. They're joining gangs, they're committing crimes, they're tagging, they're selling drugs, they're doing drugs, they're getting 13, 14, 15-year-old girls pregnant out of wedlock. In the social service bureaucracy, they love it because the more dysfunction there is, the more they can weaponize that dysfunction to extort people out of their money, which will create more dysfunction, which will further enrich them. So let's give a quote about the bureaucracy in California. Quote, if California's poverty rate should ever be substantially reduced by getting the typical welfare client back into the workforce, many bureaucrats could lose their jobs. With 883,000 full-time equivalent state and local employees in 2014, according to Governing, California has an enormous bureaucracy, a unionized public sector workforce that exercises tremendous power through voting and lobbying. Also, here's a fun fact for you. California leads the nation in having more people on welfare than in the workforce. I already explained to you, all those bureaucrats, they have every incentive to pursue the status quo that is turning California into Hispanic Detroit because they are enriching themselves at the expense of other people. The Hispanics don't matter. It doesn't matter to them if they assimilate. All that matters to them is they remain poor, ignorant, and stupid, and voting for them and being dependent on government, which will keep them in power, which will grow their power, and which will line their own pockets, all at the expense of productive taxpayers and a lack of wealth and jobs. It is truly insidious. It truly is, and I'm trying to warn people. This is not the path of prosperity. This is the path to Greece, Detroit, Chicago, even more extreme examples, Venezuela, Cuba. This is leftism, folks. So let's talk about crime. Illegals commit 22% of all murders, 18% of all fraud, 13% of all money laundering, 29% of all drug trafficking, and 72% of all drug possession conviction in the United States. So blacks commit 52% of all murders, and illegals commit 22% of all murders. That's almost 80% of all murders being committed by a small fraction of the American population. Wrap your head around that. Looking at Detroit, Detroit became a third ward hellhole due to lax policing and catch and release policies. Due to liberal policies about crime shot up. Between 1960 and 1976, a citizen's chances of becoming a victim of a violent crime tripled. Also, the murder rate in 1974 was more than twice what it was in 1961. Crime had been going down for decades before the pro-criminal shift occurred, and that was due to David Bazelon and Earl Warren passing a bunch of laws that are pro-criminal, extending their rights, making it harder to convict them, treating the root causes of crime with social programs and create more crime and poverty, which these same leftists use to justify more social programs, which continues to grow their power, which erodes the freedom of the citizens and lines their pockets. Because I'm telling you, all these leftists that are in favor of government schools and government healthcare and all this stuff, none of them send their kids to government schools, and none of them send them to get government healthcare. None. Look at all the bigwigs in these school districts all across California. Do you think they're sending their kids to those same government school districts that they work for? God, no. So let's talk about California and how through leftist policies it's increasing crime. Jerry Brown has passed Proposition 47 and AB 109, pro-criminal bills. Prop 47 reclassified many drug and property felonies as misdemeanors, reduced all thefts under $950 to misdemeanors, and prohibited law enforcement from collecting the DNA of misdemeanors. So what do you think happened by making crime more cost efficient for criminals? It increased the consumption. The crime went up. At my local grocery store, they had to hire more security and put more cameras in because of this law. The police aren't rolling on those kinds of crimes anymore. Even in Atlanta, for example, the police department told all stores, we are not responding to shoplifting calls anymore. If you're a big store, get your own security. If you're a small business, good luck. Which means the small businesses are going to be plundered and they're going to go out of business, which is going to lead to less wealth and less jobs and more unemployment. AB 109 was passed by Brown in May 2011, which sent many felons to county jail instead of state prison and eliminated parole supervision. While prison numbers fell because you're releasing more criminals on the street, what do you think happened? Crime went up. For example, in 2013, LAPD was to send 160 cops to do home visits for 5,400 ex-convicts. By that fall, 57% of them had already been arrested for new crimes or parole violations, and about a fifth were in hiding. If you listen to my podcast about black crime, I go more into detail about these pro-criminal policies, this whole criminal justice reform, how basically it's a big lie that blacks are in jail for no reason whatsoever. It's a big jail that a bunch of people, it's a big myth that a bunch of people are in jail for having a bit of weed. No. When you release these criminals on the street, you get more crime, and crime causes poverty because that increases insurance costs, shoplifting goes up, vandalism goes up, you lose customers because the neighborhoods aren't safe. It leads to less jobs and less employment and more poverty. And what I'm saying is you go to all these leftist Democrat places all across the country with these crime problems, Detroit, Baltimore, St. Louis, Philadelphia, they are all soft on crime. And they're all huge on these failing government programs that do nothing but perpetuate dependency, create more poverty, and keep those same leftists in power because you created more dependence on you. So let's talk about the implications of Hispanic Detroit. This is a warning to the law-abiding Hispanics out there. Look at what has happened to the black family and how black crime has shot up tremendously in the wake of leftist policies that sound good but lead to disaster time and time again. Look at the schools in the cities that are run by Democrats. Look at them. Okay? Look at the wealth that they create. Look at the job market. Look at the schools. Look at the crime rates. You're not a victim. It's a big lie. The Republican Party does not hate you. The Democrat Party is the ones that are racist because they tell you because you have a certain skin color, you must vote this way. They tell people that because your skin is a certain color, you have privilege. They tell you that because you have a certain skin color or a certain genitalia, you are a victim. You are oppressed. It's all a lie. If you want to stay out of poverty, you graduate high school, get a full-time job, avoid jail, and you don't have a baby out of wedlock. You will stay out of poverty 98% of the time. Okay? Free markets, family, education, and savings are a proven way to escape poverty. If you look at any successful minority group all around the world, whether it's the Jews, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Germans, the Italians, the Gujaratis, the Lebanese, they have marketable skills, they save, and they value family. There has been no greater producer of wealth in the history of humanity than the free market enterprise system. None. Look at the places that follow leftism, communism, socialism. Look at how Latin America is a disaster because instead of doing like Singapore and Hong Kong, reducing the scope of government, opening up the markets, being anti-union and attracting investments, they did the exact opposite. Okay? Don't vote Democrat this June. Please do not vote for a Democrat. If you don't want Hispanic Detroit, if you want jobs, if you want economic growth, if you want safe streets, if you want low taxes, if you want freedom, and you want to keep your kids out of failing government schools, you will not vote for a Democrat for governor of California. They have no solutions to the myriad problems I laid out. Their solutions are to follow the same terrible policies that created these problems because they're in the business of buying votes. So here's a final quote from Robert Grace, an LA prosecutor. As a civilized society, we can't allow what's happening in Latin America to take over here. Venezuela and Mexico are awash in appalling violence because they don't respect the law. Let me give you a few stats on Latin America. Brazil, Colombia, the Savior, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and Venezuela together account for 1 in every 4 homicides on Earth. In 2016, at least 43 of the 50 most homicidal cities in the world, led by Holy Savior, Acapulco, and St. Peter Sula, were located in Latin America. You want to change your outlook, you want to change your outcome, you have to change your behavior. In a free market society, the poor are lifted up by acquiring marketable skills, and they're lifted up because others are working to produce valuable goods and services at affordable prices. You want to be a contributing member of the United States, you need to learn the language. Don't have too many babies. Don't have them out of wedlock. Get an education. Get a skill. If you do those things, you will stay out of poverty. If you follow the Detroit pattern, which is pandering to unions, engaging in class warfare, being anti-business, and expanding entitlement programs, you will end up with death, destruction, and disaster. So if you want success, if you want to make California great again, we have to do the exact opposite. We have to liberate the students from these failing government schools. We have to break down the public service sector unions. We have to have law so that low-skilled people are able to find jobs and that they are able to acquire the skills to command a higher income. And we need to be hard on crime, and we need to enforce the law. If you are here illegally, you are not entitled to anything. You are only entitled to a one-way ticket out of here. My father is from the old country, and he said that if you went to Mexico illegally, and they found out that you were there illegally, they'd put you in jail, and once they had enough illegals in jail, they'd send you on a one-way ticket back to where you came from. That is what we need to do, because if we don't do that, there's going to be an even bigger explosion of Democrat voters, and you are going to be living in Hispanic Detroit. That's the Lord Gord Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, subscribe on Podbean, donate on Patreon, and share it with your friends. If you find the information useful, if you find these topics interesting, share it with your friends. I'm trying to get this message out there. I'm trying to create wealth. I'm trying to get people out of poverty. I'm trying to show them the best ways to rise out of poverty and not to blame others for your problems. So please share it. If you're in LA, come to the Blues Jam in Lincoln Heights at the Airliner every Tuesday night from 9 p.m. to midnight. It's 21 and over, free admission, and they sell dollar tacos. Also, get the Lord Gord album. This isn't TV. It's funky. Get it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, Tidal, whatever. Next week, I'm going to discuss a lighter topic. I'm going to talk about my favorite band, The Time. I'm going to talk about how they were formed, the history of the band, what they went through, and why they are my favorite band. So that's going to be an episode that's a bit more fun for the listeners. I'm Lord Gord, and I'll talk to you next time.